today we are talking more about not just being women, but being women of a certain color, which globally has become an issue because the European centric white have colonized the world for centuries and have defined also what beauty is, or what is the norm. And therefore, whether we like it or not, at some level we are marginalized. Whether we want it or not, we are. Maybe there are more of us, but we've been kind of pushed to the wall, and we've been we are having to fight about it. We are having to talk about it. We are having to make our space in the world.
One of the problems that humanity has is sort of understanding that differences don't matter by and large, and working out which ones are important and which ones aren't.
But color and gender, I don't know, for some reason, is something that worldwide you do make those connections immediately, because there's a sense of shared experience. You've kind of gone through similar struggles. You've gone through similar emotions. You've been made to feel small. A sense of self-worth has been questioned, and one has struggled through it. And because you hope that you're on that journey, I don't think you can ever be fully empowered, because it is a journey, it is a process. You understand the other person if they have similar experiences. And while each of us would have unique experiences, there are also commonalities in the way people look at us, in the way people, define us, in the way people put us down. And so all of those things, like I know sometimes, whatever color you wear, if you wear a darker color and they say, oh, we don't wear so many dark colors, it makes you look darker. If you wear light colors, they will say, oh, there's too much of a contrast. I don't think you should wear such light colors. If it's too bright, then this color looks much better on a lighter skin. You can never do it right. What really bothers me about this is not only how the world views, but the fact that to some extent, we, the best of us, also kind of try and comply with those norms of beauty.
But I've been struck by how it's almost like that self-policing, isn't it? Which says,
yes.
I remember somebody saying to me once, are you sitting in the shade because you don't want to go any darker? And I said, no, I'm sitting in the shade because I'm too hot. So other people projecting their own anxieties about skin color
all the time,
and this is a lovely, one of the lovely legacies of colonialism in the Caribbean, and to some extent in Africa still, where skin lightening creams are still being sold. Even though
in India, it's a huge thing, Lola. It's one of the biggest markets, in the whole cosmetic. If you take all the skincare products, all the cosmetics in one big bucket, the largest bucket is just this skin whitening industry. And it's across class. So whether you barely can afford to eat, but you will have a skin whitening cream. We had a cream called Fair and Lovely. It became such a euphemism for beauty. So, everything. And that's why there was a campaign called Dark is Beautiful, which started in 2009 by a group called Women of Worth. And they came to me in 2013 and said, would you support this initiative? And at that time, I was doing a lot more work on, just women's abuse and domestic violence and just lack of opportunities that women get, and, the broader issues of inequality, that I thought, is the skin color, does it deserve like a complete standalone focus? Unlike, we don't really call it racism in India. So it's not even called out. There was really no name for it, because we are all sort of shades of browns, from, very dark to very light and everything in between. So I didn't even think, but I supported that campaign. And I realized the reason it got completely viral, because it was, it had just touched a very raw nerve. And there were these young girls and other women and even some men who were kind of wanting to be told, or wanting to be sort of felt that, okay, they were so vulnerable and they were so anxious about it, that suddenly it spoke to them, this campaign called Dark is Beautiful. And I didn't even like that title, so I was like, why does it have to be a response to Fair and Lovely? You're almost saying dark is also beautiful. It was actually a much bigger issue than even I realized, because my parents didn't put this complex in me, even though being a dark person in a country like India, where 90% anyway are dark, but still sort of being told constantly, are you sitting in the shade because you don't want to be tan? Are you not drinking tea because you don't want to be tan? Why don't you apply turmeric mixed with this so that, your skin will get lighter? All kinds of invasive, horrible things.
That's awful.
It is really, and it's a huge obsession here. So anybody who's dark, they call themselves wheatish. If you're wheatish, they call themselves fair. And there's so much of photoshopping, and it's a huge obsession. So all our hoardings have light skin color women. Our magazines are all with light skin color women. Our films, our television, everywhere, in a country which is dark, are represented by light-skinned women. So it's a strange feeling, because you are you never see people like yourself. And even especially in the film industry, I mean, I've always worked from the periphery of it. It's always been the light-skinned women. And if you're slightly dark, all the dusky, as they call them, the dusky women progressively became lighter and lighter with every film.
It's really interesting, Nandita, because it sounds, to be frank, gross. But also gross. that it's so pervasive. And but there are sort of analogues here as well. When I say here, sure. I kind of mean Britain and the US, because if we're talking about film and Black people. Mm-hmm. So a few years ago, there were these things bubble up every now and then. And it's called colorism. It's useful to have a hook, isn't it, to put something on. And so it was talked about in relation to the music industry. And, looking at the biggest name Black stars, they would always be lighter skinned Black women. So these kinds of things persist. And certainly in the Caribbean, they persist. And you will know within the same family, you can get a variation.
Oh, yes.
In and so it then becomes this bizarre thing whereby people are kind of, being critical, as it were, of their own family. And I always recall a friend of mine who was originally from Ghana, and her children, or her nieces, I think, were quite quote unquote dark, because of course it all depends on where you put the color spectrum as to what's dark and what's light.
Yes, exactly.
But they were considered to be dark. And the other Black kids in their class wrote sooty on their exercise books, and they called them Africans as a term of insult. So this internalization of the self-hatred goes very, very deep and is very difficult, obviously, to dispel. So what do you think? How do you tackle this?
I think it's a tough thing, because it's a condition. You've been conditioned to define beauty in a certain way. You've been conditioned to feel a certain way. Dark people also discriminate against other dark people. It's not that it's only the light-skinned people, strangely. It's always the dark people as well, because they come with such a sense of low self-esteem that you're always constantly feeling that you're just not good enough. And you yourself then define beauty as being light-skinned. Like so many times I was told, oh, you've got nice features, even though you're dark. Or, or some girl would say, like if I'm giving a talk in a girls' college or in a, or even in a co-ed, but a woman raises her hand and says, how come you're so confident despite being dark? So they are actually just projecting, and they are thinking that, okay, confidence, feeling good about yourself, and being dark are like two diametrically opposite things, and they can't come together. So it is, I think each one of us has to work on ourselves, and it's very difficult to extricate yourself of that pressure around you, which you then have internalized. So I don't know what the solution is, but it's these conversations, and it's, sense of self-awareness, and then catching yourself when you yourself are prejudiced, and when somebody who's darker than you, then you have a judgment on that, and how you feel when someone makes you feel different, and all of that. So it's a journey, I think, and each one of us have to take.
I think that's right. I said this thing about doing work on yourself, and I think that it's not only that kind of projection and internalization, because what I've also noticed is that then some dark-skinned people kind of, it's almost like they want to punish lighter skinned black people. The old kind of hierarchy within enslavement in the Caribbean in particular, if you were lighter skinned, it meant that somewhere along the line, perhaps there'd been some white blood, as it were, and therefore you would get better treatment. You wouldn't be working in the fields all day, you'd be in the house and maybe, let's say, having time with the master of the house, you know. So all of these things are wrapped up together and become a very effective way of divide and rule. Because whilst we're carping about people being lighter than this group or people being darker than that group, meanwhile, people are going hungry, women are being subjected to domestic violence, you know, there's just endless conflicts, there's the environmental crisis that we find ourselves in, and we're sort of being diverted into worrying about whether an educated woman in a movie can have light or dark skin. That's nonsense, isn't it? And also, as you've already said, it's a particular aesthetic. It's not even as though you're able to think of it as enhancing. How can I put it? It's this idea that you're enhancing not for yourself, but actually to look like some idealized norm of what a woman should look like, whatever her color. It also includes, for me, you know, I tend to shine quite a bit. I don't know if you can see. And like photographers.
Not right now, but.
But photographers, I mean, and this is like, you know, people of my sort of age, photographers will say, oh, we've got to take off a bit of that shine for the photograph. And I say, oh, okay, a little bit of powder and what have you. And then it's like, I look at, and I think, is that me? You know, I don't remember looking like that. So the idea that those filters at the extreme end will then be, you can never live up to that. You are not that person. So then who are you? Who are you? And what is it that you're trying to project to people? So there's this whole sort of layer of fakery.
It's very tied into, you know, finding a boyfriend, getting married, pleasing your parents, getting a job, having a life. So when you connect all of these things to your skin color, it's not just a cosmetic anymore. It's not about just beautifying yourself and feeling good about it. It's got so much more.
So if you're looking to the literally the skin deep solution to becoming more confident in yourself and having that sense of being fully realized as a human being, then you're yes, you know, you get your temporary hit, that's fine. And then, you know, if that makes you feel comfortable, sure, but just think why you're making that choice, and is it really a choice that you're making? Because if you're really confident, you're confident in yourself.
It wouldn't matter.
Yeah, but if it's a question of saying, I want my skin to be lighter because everybody else wants my skin to be lighter. So what does that mean then if you have a child or you have children around you from friends and relatives that have darker skin? You're immediately going to undermine their confidence because you're saying that you can only be confident if you're lighter skinned. And I mean, it doesn't make sense. People think that they're making a full and free choice.
But it's not. It's a notional choice, you know, it's a choice that you think you're making, but actually it's completely fed in by how people want to look at you or how they see you or they want to see you. So,
and incidentally, sorry to interrupt you, Nandita, but just to say that isn't the components of those creams and those processes are carcinogenic. So
terrible.
You know, be confident and have skin cancer. Is that what you're saying? You know, and it's not about sort of critiquing other women or being critical of them for doing this because we understand the pressures, but it's about saying, how can we support people, women in particular?
Yeah, just to feel more full and more complete about with themselves, because women can also be very critical.
Of course.
I mean, you know, all of us, like, it's, I think each of us has a story, and the more we bond, the more conversations we have, the more we make each other feel comfortable in their own skins, and the more we feel comfortable in our skins, possibly some change will be more visible.
Eventually, it will.
Eventually.